At 24, Mara Bennett buried her father and came home to find her key no longer fit the lock. Her stepmother handed her a duffel bag, her father's dog, just $37, and the deed to an abandoned farmhouse in the West Virginia mountains. Everyone said the place was worthless, but with nowhere else to go, Mara moved in anyway. Then the flood came. Food began running out, and her dog Scout started digging beneath a pile of rotting boards behind the house. What he uncovered was a basement door no one had mentioned, and what waited below would change everything Mara believed about her family. But before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and if you enjoy heartfelt mysteries like this one, subscribe to the channel, and let's begin. Mara Bennett knew something was wrong before she tried the key a second time. She stood on the front porch of the house where she had grown up, still wearing the black dress from her father's funeral, and stared at the brass deadbolt as if it might explain itself. Rainwater dripped from the porch roof behind her. Scout waited beside her old car, his gray-black coat damp and his eyes fixed on her. Mara pushed the key in again. It stopped halfway. She pulled it out, checked it, and tried once more. Come on! The lock did not move. Through the narrow window beside the door, a shadow crossed the hallway. Mara knocked. A moment later, Diane Bennett opened the door only far enough to stand in the gap. She had already changed out of her funeral clothes. My key doesn't work, Mara said. I changed the locks. Mara stared at her stepmother. Today, Diane's face tightened. Your things are packed. For several seconds, Mara could only hear rain tapping the porch railing. 3 hours earlier, she had watched 6 men lower her father's coffin into wet West Virginia earth. She had stood beside Diane while the minister spoke about Daniel Bennett's patience, loyalty, and quiet kindness. Now she wasn't allowed inside his house. I just need my suitcase. It's here. Diane reached behind the door and pushed out a faded blue duffel bag. A second cardboard box followed. That's everything. Mara looked past her toward the staircase. I wanted to go through Dad's things. We've been through this. No, you went through them. Diane's expression hardened. I took care of your father while he was sick. Mara, I handled the hospital, the bills, the house. I'm not doing this on the porch tonight. Mara swallowed the answer that came to her. Anger would not open the door. So that's it? Diane disappeared briefly and returned with a worn brown wallet and a large envelope. These were set aside with your things. Mara recognized the wallet immediately. Her father had carried it for as long as she could remember. The leather was cracked around the edges. She opened it. No cards remained. Behind an old receipt were 2 20s, except one was actually a 10, and the smaller bills beneath brought the total to $37. 37. Mara almost laughed, but nothing about the moment was funny. And Scout, she asked. Diane glanced toward the dog. I can't keep him. Scout's ears lifted at his name. Mara closed the wallet. The dog had belonged to Daniel, following him from the kitchen to the garage and waiting beside his chair every evening. Leaving Scout here wasn't an option anyway. Fine. Diane handed her the envelope. There's property paperwork in there. The Hale place. Mara frowned. Grandma Eleanor's farmhouse. Apparently, it passed through your mother's side and eventually to you. Your father kept the paperwork. Mara remembered the farmhouse only as a distant shape from childhood drives into the mountains. What's it worth? Diane gave a tired, humorless smile. If you want your inheritance, there it is. A rotting farmhouse nobody has wanted in years? Then she closed the door. The new deadbolt clicked. Mara stood motionless until Scout nudged his nose against her hand. Yeah, she whispered. I know. She loaded the duffel and box into the car, then sat behind the wheel and checked her bank account. The number made her stomach tighten. After gas and the trip home for the funeral, she had almost nothing left. A motel might buy her a night, maybe two if she found somewhere cheap. After that, she had no plan. Mara looked at the envelope. The deed listed an address in the hills beyond town. A farmhouse nobody wanted was still a farmhouse. "Looks like we're homeowners," she told Scout. The dog climbed into the passenger seat. By the time Mara left the paved county road, daylight was fading. The route narrowed into wet gravel bordered by dense trees. Branches scraped the sides of the car, and twice she slowed to crawl through muddy ruts. Her phone lost service 5 miles from the property. Perfect. Scout panted beside her. The farmhouse appeared near dusk, sitting alone beyond a sagging fence. Mara stopped the car and stared. 2 stories of weathered boards leaned into the gray evening. Several porch rails were missing. The roof sagged near one chimney, and weeds crowded the steps. Diane undersold it. Mara murmured. She stepped onto the porch and noticed something that didn't belong. The front door was old, its paint peeling in long strips, but the lock was clean brass with only light weathering. Mara touched it. Newer. Much newer than everything around it. She tried the key attached to the deed envelope. The lock opened. Inside smelled of dust, damp wood, and cold ashes. There was no electricity when she tested the switches. The kitchen faucet gave her nothing. A dark stain spread across part of the ceiling where rain had found its way through the roof. Mara checked the downstairs rooms before darkness made exploring foolish. She found an old couch, a wood stove, 2 chairs, and little else. It wasn't comfortable, but it had walls. Tonight, that was enough. She ate crackers from her car and gave Scout the last portion of dog food she had brought from town. Later, wrapped in her father's old canvas jacket, Mara lay on the couch, listening to rain strike the windows. The jacket still carried a faint trace of sawdust and his aftershave. Or perhaps she only wanted it to. She pressed her face into the collar. "I thought we'd have more time, Dad," she whispered. Scout lay beside the couch. Mara closed her eyes. Minutes later, his nails clicked sharply against the floor. She opened them. Scout was standing rigid, ears forward. He didn't look at her. His attention was fixed on the floorboards near the far wall. A low growl rolled from his chest. Mara sat up. "What is it?" Scout moved closer, nose almost touching the wood. Then he growled again, louder this time, at something beneath the house. Mara stayed upright on the couch. Listening, Scout's growl faded, but he remained planted near the far wall, nose lowered toward the floorboards. "Probably a raccoon," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was reassuring. She found her phone and switched on its flashlight. The floor was scarred and dusty, but solid. Mara crouched beside Scout and pressed her palm against the boards. Nothing moved beneath them. She knocked twice. The sound was dull. Mouse, raccoon, ghost, pick one. Scout sniffed along the baseboard before finally allowing Mara to pull him away. She wedged a chair beneath the front doorknob anyway. By morning, the rain had weakened to a gray drizzle. Mara woke cold and stiff, with Scout curled beside the couch. Daylight made the farmhouse less frightening but more discouraging. She walked through it carefully, taking inventory. The kitchen cupboards contained an empty flour tin, cracked plates, and several jars too old to trust. A narrow pantry held nothing edible. Upstairs, one bedroom had a broken window covered with plywood. Another had water damage along the ceiling. There were blankets in a closet, but they smelled of mildew. Mara returned downstairs and counted what she had brought from the car: crackers, 2 granola bars, half a bottle of water. and almost no dog food. "We're doing great," she told Scout. He wagged once. She tried the kitchen faucet again. Nothing. Behind the house, she found an old hand pump surrounded by weeds. She worked the handle until her shoulder hurt. No water came. The sky above the hills was darkening again. When her phone briefly found a signal, a weather alert appeared. Heavy rain expected through the region, with possible flooding along creeks and low roads. Mara looked toward her car. Leaving immediately would have been sensible, but leaving for where? She was considering that when Scout barked. A pickup truck had stopped near the sagging fence. A man stepped out wearing work boots and a brown jacket. He was tall, perhaps around 30, with rain darkening his hair. He didn't approach until Mara came onto the porch. "Everything okay?" he called. Mara kept one hand on Scout's collar. "Depends on your definition." The man nodded toward her car. "Saw it from the road. Nobody's stayed up here in a long time." "I am now." He looked at the farmhouse, then at her. "Your family, Mara." "Bennett, Eleanor Hale was my grandmother." Something changed in his expression. Eleanor's granddaughter, Mara, nodded. "Eli Mercer." He gestured toward the neighboring ridge. "My place is a few miles that way." Scout sniffed his offered hand, and to Mara's annoyance, immediately approved of him. Eli scratched behind the dog's ear. "I didn't know the family was coming back." Mara caught the wording. Coming back. Eli looked toward the house. "Just haven't seen a Bennett or a Hale living here in years." "That's not exactly what you said." He gave a small shrug. "Didn't mean anything by it." Mara wasn't convinced. But the dead hand pump mattered more. "You know anything about wells?" "Enough to make bad decisions confidently." She almost smiled. Almost. Eli followed her around back and worked the pump handle several times. Then he removed a side plate with a screwdriver from his truck. "Leather seal may have dried out." "Could be worse. Can you fix it?" "Maybe, if the well itself is good." While he worked, Mara noticed a strip of metal flashing along the farmhouse roof. It was cleaner than the rusted sections around it. "Is that new?" Eli looked up. "Newer than the roof." Mara walked closer. Near the back wall, 2 siding boards were pale beneath their weathering, and beside the porch sat a small cardboard box under an overturned bucket. She opened it. Roofing nails, bright metal, barely any rust. The front door lock hadn't been the only recent thing. "Someone's been working here." Eli wiped his hands on his jeans. "Looks that way." "Who?" "Couldn't tell you." His answer came too quickly for Mara's liking, but she had no evidence he knew more. After several minutes, the pump coughed. Muddy water spat from the pipe. Mara stepped back. Eli pumped again until a thin stream appeared. "Don't drink that yet," he warned. "Let it run. And if you're staying, the system needs a proper look." Staying. The word felt strange. Mara glanced at the farmhouse. "I haven't decided." Rain began tapping against the leaves. Eli looked toward the creek below the property. "Decide soon. That road gets ugly in heavy weather." He packed his tools and gave Mara his number, though neither pretended her phone would reliably work here. "If the signal comes back and you need something, call." "Why are you helping me?" Mara asked. Eli paused beside his truck. "Because you're standing outside a broken farmhouse with a dead water system and a storm coming." "That's not an answer. It's the one I've got." After he left, Mara drove toward the nearest small store while the road was still passable. She stood under fluorescent lights, calculating prices on her phone. Bread, peanut butter, soup, bottled water, dog food, batteries. Every item mattered. At the register, she took out Daniel's wallet. For a moment, she couldn't remove the bills. $37. Yesterday, it had seemed almost insulting. The scraps left after a funeral and a locked door. Now it was food, water, another day. She paid and watched the cashier count part of her father's last cash into the drawer. Back in the car, Mara gripped the wallet before putting it away. "Sorry, Dad," she murmured, though she didn't know what she was apologizing for. By afternoon, the rain had strengthened. Mara carried the groceries inside, placed buckets beneath 2 leaks, and filled containers from the pump after letting it run clear enough for washing. She kept the bottled water for drinking. Scout paced restlessly. Each time Mara turned around, he was looking toward the back of the house. What? Scout trotted to the rear door. "Absolutely not. It's pouring." He scratched once. Mara sighed, pulled on her father's jacket, and opened the door. Scout shot into the rain. She followed him past the pump toward a heap of rotting boards and fallen branches near the foundation. Scout shoved his nose beneath one board and began digging furiously. "Leave it." He ignored her. Mud flew behind his paws. Mara grabbed one of the rotten boards and pulled it aside, expecting a rabbit hole. Scout dug deeper. His claws struck something with a hard, metallic scrape. Mara froze. "Scout, move." She knelt in the mud and cleared away wet leaves with both hands. Beneath them was a flat sheet of rusted metal. She brushed away another layer of dirt. A curved shape emerged beneath her fingers. Not pipe, not farm equipment. Mara closed her hand around it and pulled. It didn't move. She cleared more mud until she could see what Scout had uncovered. A metal handle, fixed horizontally into something buried beneath the earth. Mara stared at it through the rain. It was a door handle. Mara kept one hand around the metal handle while rain ran from her hair into her eyes. She pulled harder. Nothing happened. Scout pawed at the mud beside her, exposing another strip of rusted metal. What Mara had taken for a sheet was wider than she thought, extending beneath the rotting boards toward the farmhouse foundation. She stood and dragged the remaining boards aside. Beneath them, half buried by decades of soil and leaves, was the outline of a slanted cellar door. "You've got to be kidding me." She had walked through the farmhouse twice. She had seen no basement stairs, no interior door, nothing in the property papers suggesting a lower level. Scout sniffed along the edge and sneezed mud from his nose. "You found it. Now stop destroying it." Mara tried the handle again. The door shifted perhaps half an inch, then caught. Dirt had packed around the frame, and a thick layer of roots crossed one corner. She searched the shed and porch for something useful, but found only a rusted shovel with a cracked handle. For nearly 20 minutes she dug around the door, stopping whenever the wooden handle threatened to split. The rain intensified. Water began collecting in the shallow trench she had created. Finally, Mara abandoned the effort and went inside. Her phone showed one weak bar. She called Eli. The first attempt failed. The second connected. "Mara," his voice broke through static. "Scout found a door." Silence. "A what? In the ground behind the house?" "Some kind of cellar entrance. It's buried. Don't force it." "I already tried." "Of course you did." The call crackled. "I'll come up." Eli arrived less than an hour later carrying a shovel, pry bar, and flashlight. By then, the rain had turned the yard into slick brown mud. He crouched beside the exposed metal and cleared one corner with his gloved hand. "Cellar door. I figured that part out. You know about a basement?" "No." Mara retrieved the deed envelope from inside and showed him the papers she had. They found references to the house, acreage, and outbuilding and boundary lines. Nothing identified a basement. Eli examined the foundation. Could be older than some of this paperwork. Houses up here changed over generations. People added things without worrying much about records. It was a reasonable explanation. But Mara looked at the hidden door again. Why bury the entrance? Maybe nobody buried it on purpose. 30 years of leaves, runoff, and nobody clearing this side of the house can do plenty. Together they dug around the frame. Scout supervised from beneath the porch until Eli wedged the pry bar near the handle. Stand back. Metal groaned. The door lifted an inch and slammed down again. Something's catching underneath, Eli said. Mara helped him clear more dirt. On their third attempt, the seal broke with a wet sucking sound. Cold, stale air escaped through the gap. Mara raised her flashlight. That's comforting. Eli lifted the door far enough to reveal stone steps descending into darkness. Scout immediately tried to squeeze past him. Mara caught his collar. You have done enough exploring. Eli shone his flashlight downward. Steps look impact. A distant rumble rolled through the valley. Not thunder. Water. Eli turned toward the slope below the farmhouse. They walked far enough to see the creek through the trees. Yesterday it had been a narrow stream. Now brown water rushed between the banks, carrying branches downstream. That's rising fast, Elle said. How bad? Bad enough that you shouldn't stay. Mara looked toward her car. Then I'll leave. Eli didn't answer immediately. They drove separately toward the road. Less than half a mile down the mountain, they stopped. Water was already spreading across the lowest section, churning over the gravel. Eli stepped out, watched a branch sweep across the crossing, then returned. We're not driving through that. Your truck's bigger. Water doesn't care. Mara stared at the flooded road. So what do I do? For now, stay high and stay dry. The house is above the creek. Back at the farmhouse, the newly opened cellar door waited like a dark mouth in the rain. Mara had no desire to investigate it now, but runoff was already flowing toward the exposed entrance. If that fills with water, we'll lose whatever's down there, she said. Eli looked at her. We don't even know if anything's down there. Scout strained toward the steps. Mara tightened her grip on his collar. Only one way to fix both problems. They propped the door open and descended. The stone stairs were damp but stable. At the bottom, Eli swept his flashlight across a surprisingly large room. Rough stone walls supported heavy wooden shelves. Dust covered almost everything, yet the basement was orderly. Mason jars lined one wall. Wooden crates were stacked beneath shelves. Bundles of blankets had been wrapped in waxed cloth. Several metal containers sat raised on bricks. This isn't junk, Mara whispered. Eli opened one container carefully. Inside were sealed packages. Old, but protected from moisture. Another crate held canned goods. Their labels faded beyond use. A shelf contained folded clothing and heavy quilts. Nothing looked casually abandoned. Someone had stored these things deliberately. Mara moved deeper into the basement. Why would Grandma keep all this storm supplies? Elle suggested. For one person, her flashlight passed over a row of wooden boxes. Something had been written on each in black marker. Mara wiped dust from the nearest lid. Dalton NOV, 1984. The next read, Calder Jan, 1985. Another, Webb Mar, 1985. Those are names, Mara said. Family names. Dates followed each one. Some boxes had additional marks beside them, but Mara couldn't understand their meaning. Eli stopped moving. Mara noticed and followed his gaze to a crate near the bottom shelf. The writing was faded, but still readable. Mercer, Feb, 1986. Mercer, Mara said quietly. Eli crouched in front of it. He touched the letters without opening the box. "That's your family." "Yeah." "Do you know why your name is down here?" Eli shook his head. The easy humor he had shown at the pump was gone. "No." A scratching sound came from behind them. Scout had squeezed down the steps despite Mara's efforts to leave him near the doorway. "Scout," he ignored her, nosing behind a low shelf. "Get out of there!" He pushed harder. Something shifted. A small tin box dropped from behind the shelf and struck the stone floor with a sharp clang. Mara picked it up. The lid was spotted with rust, but not locked. She exchanged a glance with Eli, then opened it. Inside lay a cloth-wrapped book. Mara unfolded the fabric and lifted out an old journal with a dark green cover. The pages had yellowed along the edges. She opened it carefully. On the first page, written in faded blue ink, were 2 words in a handwriting she had not seen since childhood. Eleanor Hale. Mara held the journal beneath Eli's flashlight and turned the first page carefully. The paper felt brittle at the corners, but Eleanor Hale's handwriting remained surprisingly clear. The first entries were ordinary enough dates, short notes about weather, repairs, and supplies. Then the names began. Dalton, Calder, Webb, Mercer. The same names written on the boxes around them. Beside each name, Eleanor had listed numbers and items. Calder, 2 adults, 3 children. Mara read, flour, beans, canned tomatoes, 2 blankets. She moved down the page. Webb, cold, lamp oil, children's coats, cough medicine. Eli leaned closer. Sounds like orders or customers. Mara turned another page. More names, more supplies. Some entries included quantities of potatoes, preserves, soap, firewood, and clothing. Yet something was missing. There are no prices. Eli took the journal when she offered it and studied several entries. Maybe she kept money somewhere else. Then why list everything except what people owed? Mara opened one of the wooden boxes. Inside were folded blankets and several empty cloth sacks. On the inside of the lid, written in the same blue ink as the journal, was a single word: returned. "There," Mara pointed. "I saw marks like that on some of the other crates. They checked 3 more. One bore no additional notation. 2 had returned written beneath the family name." Eli frowned. Maybe they returned what they borrowed. Blankets, maybe. But flour, medicine, coal? Above them, rain hammered against the cellar door. A thin stream of muddy water had begun running down one side of the steps. Eli immediately closed the journal. "We need to deal with that." They carried the journal upstairs and wrapped it again before placing it on the kitchen table. Outside, the yard had changed in less than an hour. Water flowed through channels in the mud, and the creek below was no longer merely loud. It was a continuous roar. Eli used the shovel to cut a shallow drainage trench away from the basement entrance, while Mara dragged the loose boards aside so they would not wash against the door. Scout paced beneath the porch, whining whenever Mara disappeared into the rain. "Barn!" Eli called, pointing across the yard. Water had begun pooling near its lower wall. "If it gets another foot higher, anything on the floor in there is gone." They hurried across. The barn contained little of obvious value: old hand tools, broken furniture, empty feed bins, but several cardboard cartons sat directly on the floor. Mara lifted one and felt the damp bottom sag. "Up there." Eli pointed to a workbench. Together they moved the boxes, then stacked loose tools on higher shelves. By the time they finished, Mara's sleeves were soaked and her shoes squelched with every step. She stopped in the barn doorway, breathing hard. "How much higher can it get?" Eli watched the brown water moving beyond the fence. Depends how long it rains. That's not reassuring. Wasn't meant to be. They returned to the farmhouse. Mara peeled off her wet jacket and checked the basement entrance. The drainage trench was working for now. She looked at the journal on the table. I want to know what returned means. Eli rubbed rain from his face. You also need to eat. Mara almost argued, then realized she had eaten nothing since morning. She made peanut butter sandwiches while Eli checked the windows and placed another bucket beneath a leak. They ate standing in the kitchen. Scout received his share of dog food and then settled near Mara's feet. Afterward, she opened the journal again. The entries covered years rather than weeks. Some families appeared once. Others returned repeatedly. Dalton again, Mara said. December 1985. 5 pounds flour. Potatoes. Blankets. She flipped several pages. Calder again. Medicine and firewood. Could have been some kind of store. Eli said, without Price's credit. Then where are the debts? Mara searched more carefully. Eleanor had recorded almost everything. Dates, quantities, initials, even the number of children in certain households, but no dollar amounts appeared anywhere. Instead, returned appeared again and again, sometimes months after the original entry. Mara found a notation beside the Webb family returned Aug 1985. Another beside Calder returned APR 1986. Maybe it means they paid her back. Mara said, not necessarily money. Paid her with what? Eli shook his head. I don't know. The answer irritated her more than it should have. Every discovery seemed to create another question. She had arrived wanting nothing from this farmhouse except a roof for the night. Now she was sitting at Eleanor's kitchen table trying to reconstruct choices made 40 years earlier. A gust rattled the windows. Scout lifted his head. I should check the water, Eli said. Mara followed him outside. The rain had eased slightly, but the creek had spread into the low field. Water now touched the bottom fence rail near the barn. Eli drove a stick into the mud at its edge. Marker. We'll know if it's still climbing. Mara looked back at the farmhouse. If it reaches the house, we move upstairs, but we're not there yet. And if the road stays flooded, then we wait. She hated that answer. Waiting meant no motel, no escape, no pretending this place was merely a temporary inconvenience. When they went back inside, Mara carried the journal upstairs along with Daniel's wallet and the deed papers, unwilling to risk leaving them below if water entered the first floor. In the hallway, her flashlight caught an old frame photograph hanging crooked beside a bedroom door. Mara stopped. Dust covered the glass. She wiped it with her sleeve. The photograph showed Eleanor standing in front of the farmhouse, younger than Mara remembered her, surrounded by perhaps 15 people. Several adults stood behind children wearing oversized coats. Boxes and baskets were stacked across the porch. Mara carried the photograph downstairs. Eli, he looked up from the window. Recognize anyone? Eli took the frame. His expression changed almost immediately. He brought it closer to the lamp. That's my grandfather. You're sure? Eli pointed to a thin young man near the edge of the group. Thomas Mercer. I've seen pictures of him at that age. Mara looked from his face to the photograph. So your family was here? Apparently. And your name is on a box downstairs? Eli nodded slowly. The mystery was no longer something confined to her dead grandmother's handwriting. Someone standing beside her was connected to it. Mara returned to the journal, turning pages until she reached entries from 1986. She found Mercer Feb 1986 and traced the line with her finger. Flour, canned vegetables, 2 blankets, lamp oil, no price. Several pages later, the Mercer name appeared again. Mara leaned closer. Eli. He came beside her. Beneath the date, Eleanor had written only one short entry. Mara read it aloud. Mercers returned today. Sent them to the Dalton family. By morning, the rain had softened to a steady drizzle, and the stick Eli had planted near the flooded field showed the water had dropped several inches. Mara checked it twice before she allowed herself to believe the road might open by late morning. Eli walked the lowest section and returned with mud to his ankles. "Truck can make it now," he said. "Your car stays here." Mara looked at the journal wrapped carefully inside a plastic grocery bag. "I need to find Ruth Calder." The Calder name appeared throughout Eleanor's records, including one of the clearest returned notations. Eli knew where Ruth lived, in a small house near the edge of town. Mara left Scout at the farmhouse where he could stay dry and climbed into Eli's pickup with the journal beneath her jacket. The drive down showed what the storm had done. Gravel had washed into ditches, branches littered the road, and muddy lines on tree trunks marked how high the creek had risen. "Your grandfather never told you about Eleanor?" Mara asked. Eli shook his head. "Thomas died when I was 11. I remember him talking about hard winters and bad years when work disappeared. But not your grandmother. Would your parents know? Maybe pieces, but Ruth's older. If anyone remembers what happened in the 80s, she will." Ruth Calder's house was small and white, with a covered porch and a line of bird feeders beneath the eaves. Ruth herself answered after Mara's second knock. She was thin, silver-haired, and looked at the strangers through the screen door without opening it. "Mrs. Calder?" Mara asked. "Who's asking, Mara? Bennett?" "Eleanor Hale was my grandmother." Ruth's expression remained guarded. "Eleanor's been gone a long time, I know. I found something at her farmhouse." At the word farmhouse, Ruth's eyes moved briefly toward Eli. What kind of something? Mara took the journal from beneath her jacket. She did not need to explain. Ruth stared at the dark green cover, then opened the screen door. "Come inside." Her living room was warm enough that Mara suddenly realized how cold she had been for 2 days. Ruth sat beside a window and accepted the journal with both hands. She opened it slowly. "Lord," she whispered, "I haven't seen this in nearly 40 years. Mara sat forward. "You knew about it?" "I knew she wrote things down." Ruth found a page bearing the Calder name. Her thumb rested beside the entry. January 1985. She gave a quiet laugh without humor. "I remember that winter." Eli remained standing near the doorway. "What happened?" Ruth looked toward the window. "My husband, Frank, lost his job. Mine at the diner wasn't enough. 3 children in the house, youngest had pneumonia. And we were down to potatoes and cornmeal." Mara remembered the journal entry: flour, beans, tomatoes, blankets. "Grandma gave you supplies. Eleanor showed up with them. Did you owe her money?" Ruth looked almost offended. "She wouldn't take a dime." "Then what does returned mean?" Mara asked. Ruth's face softened. She closed the journal and rested both hands on it. About 3 months later. Frank found work. First decent paycheck he brought home. I put money in an envelope. We drove up to Eleanor's place to pay her back, and she handed the envelope right back. Ruth smiled at the memory. "Told me she wasn't a bank." Mara glanced at Eli. "So what did she want?" "Nothing from us." Ruth opened the journal again and pointed to the word. "She said if we were standing again, somebody else probably wasn't. Told us to take groceries to another family." "That's returned," Mara said. Ruth nodded. "It meant you came back when you could help." Eli moved closer. "My grandfather's entry says, the Mercers returned and were sent to the Daltons." Ruth looked at him properly for the first time. Thomas Mercer, my grandfather, then yes. Your people knew exactly how this worked. She turned several pages. Eleanor never called it charity. She knew proud people wouldn't come if they thought someone was keeping score against them. But she was keeping records. Mara said, not debts. Ruth tapped the page. Needs. And who was strong enough to help next? Mara looked around the quiet room. The boxes in the basement suddenly made sense. Flour disappeared because hungry families ate it. Blankets left with people who needed warmth. Returned had never meant that those things came back. People did. How many families? Mara asked. I couldn't tell you. More than most people knew. Why was it secret? Wasn't exactly secret, just private. Eleanor didn't need everybody knowing who couldn't feed their children. That answer affected Mara more deeply than she expected. Her grandmother had protected not only people's bodies, but their dignity. Ruth studied Mara. You don't know any of this, do you? Mara shook her head. Nobody told me. Your grandmother talked about you. Mara blinked. Me, when you were little. She kept a picture of you in her kitchen. Mara tried to remember Eleanor clearly and found only fragments, flour on an apron, strong hands, the smell of cinnamon and wood smoke. I barely remember her. She remembered you. Mara looked down before Ruth could see how much those 3 words hurt. Her phone vibrated inside her pocket. A signal had returned. Diane's name appeared on the screen. Mara almost ignored it, then answered. What? I need to finish the estate paperwork. Diane said, there are documents requiring your signature. I'm busy, Mara. This doesn't improve by dragging it out. Diane paused. If you're willing to waive any further claims connected to the estate, I can give you some cash now and close this cleanly. Mara's eyes went to the journal. How much? Diane named an amount. It wasn't life-changing, but right now it felt enormous. Food, gas, a motel. Enough to leave the farmhouse and stop worrying about every dollar. Think about it, Diane said, but not forever. The call ended. Mara stared at the dark screen. Eli had heard enough to understand. You going to sign? I don't know. For the first time since the funeral, that was completely true. Ruth handed the journal back. Don't decide anything while you're hungry or scared. Those 2 things make cheap offers look expensive. Mara slipped the journal into its bag. As she stood to leave, Ruth touched her wrist. There's something else. Mara waited. Ruth's expression had changed. You said you found all this because you went back to the farmhouse? Yes. And nobody explained why things there looked the way they did? No. Ruth frowned. That's strange. Why? Ruth looked directly at her. Didn't your father ever tell you he was fixing Eleanor's place? Mara stopped breathing for a second. Mara barely spoke during the drive back to the farmhouse. Ruth's question kept repeating in her head with each turn of Eli's truck. Didn't your father ever tell you he was fixing Eleanor's place? Daniel had never mentioned the farmhouse, not once. Mara searched her memory for some forgotten phone call, some half-finished sentence, some clue she had ignored because she had been too busy or too angry. Nothing came. Beside her, Eli kept both hands on the wheel and let the silence stand. When they reached the property, Scout rushed from the porch and circled Mara twice before pressing against her leg. She crouched to scratch his neck. Apparently you knew more about Dad than I did. Scout only leaned harder into her hand. Mara went straight inside. The newer lock, the repaired siding, the roofing nails, all of it looked different now. Before, those details had meant someone had been here. Now they suggested someone specific. Her father. Where would you start? She asked. Eli glanced around the kitchen. With the work itself, people leave habits behind. They began with the back wall. Eli pointed to 2 replaced boards beneath a window. Same cut, same nails as the box you found. He moved to the porch where 1 support post had been braced recently. This was done within the last year or so. Mara ran her fingers over the wood. Daniel had always repaired things instead of replacing them. When she was a child, he had fixed broken chair legs, loose cabinet doors, even toys Mara thought were beyond saving. His work had never been elegant, but it held. She stepped back. He used to angle nails like that. Eli looked at her. Then maybe Ruth was right. Maybe. Mara didn't know why the word came out sharp. She walked toward the small shed beside the house and pulled open the swollen door. Tools hung from rusted hooks. Most were old enough to belong to Eleanor's time, but 1 hammer lay on a bench beneath a folded tarp. Its wooden handle was worn smooth near the grip. Mara picked it up. 2 letters had been burned into the base. D.B. She stopped moving. Eli saw them without needing to ask. Daniel Bennett. Mara turned the hammer in her hands. She remembered it hanging from her father's belt when he repaired the porch at their old house. She remembered being 8 years old and handing him nails 1 at a time because he told her she was his assistant. The memory came so clearly that for a second the shed seemed too small to hold it. He was here, she said. Eli nodded. Yeah. Mara set the hammer down carefully, almost angrily. Then why didn't he tell me Eli didn't answer? She searched the bench. Beneath a coil of wire she found 3 receipts folded together. The ink had faded, but the dates were readable. Roofing material, lumber, screws, weather seal, all purchased within the last several months of Daniel's life. 1 receipt came from a hardware store less than 20 miles away. Mara checked another. Same store. He kept coming back. Looks like it. While he was sick, Eli leaned against the doorway. Depends how sick he was then. Mara stared at the dates. 1 receipt had been issued less than 3 months before Daniel died. She pictured him driving these mountain roads alone, carrying lumber into a farmhouse he had never once mentioned to his daughter. Something hot tightened behind her ribs. This is ridiculous. What is it? If he wanted me to know, he could have called. Eli stayed quiet. Mara turned toward him. You can say it. Say what? That maybe he had a reason? Eli shook his head. I don't know your father's reason. Everyone seems to. Ruth knew he was fixing the place. That doesn't mean she knew why. Mara looked away. That was precisely what made it worse. Daniel had spoken to other people about the farmhouse. Apparently worked on it for months, and somehow Mara had remained outside all of it. Again. He had my number, she said. I didn't disappear. Did you call him? Eli asked. Mara's face hardened. That's not the point. I didn't say it was. Sounds like you did. No, Eli's voice stayed even. You asked why he didn't call. I don't know. I'm not going to invent an excuse for a dead man just because it might make this easier. Mara looked at him. The answer disarmed her more than sympathy would have. She had expected him to defend Daniel, to offer some comforting explanation. Instead, he simply stood there, allowing the unfairness of it to remain unfair. Thank you, she said quietly. Eli nodded once. Outside, wind moved through the trees with a rising hiss. Eli looked toward the sky. Weather's turning again. Mara stepped from the shed. Dark clouds were gathering beyond the ridge. The creek had dropped since the previous night, but the ground remained saturated. Another storm. Forecast said more rain tonight and tomorrow. They spent the next hour preparing the farmhouse instead of searching. Eli climbed onto the lower roof with a tarp while Mara passed him rope and boards. They covered the worst leak and cleared leaves from the drainage trench near the basement entrance. Mara moved the remaining food to a high kitchen shelf and checked the bottled water. Not much left. Scout followed her constantly, restless but obedient. "If the creek rises like last time," she asked when Eli came down. "We keep watching it. No driving through water. I remember. Good. Back inside." Mara spread Daniel's receipts across the kitchen table beside Eleanor's journal. The two sets of handwriting sat 40 years apart, yet both belonged to the same farmhouse. She tried to imagine her father sitting at this table. Had he read Eleanor's journal? Had he known about the families? Had he stood in the basement beside the boxes Scout began sniffing along the pantry wall? "Scout, leave it." He pressed his nose against one board near floor level and scratched once. Mara sighed. "We are not discovering another basement today." Eli crouched beside him. Loose board. He worked his fingers beneath the edge and pulled. The narrow plank came free with little resistance. There was no hidden room behind it, only a shallow space between wall studs. Something white had been tucked inside. Mara reached in and removed a folded envelope. It wasn't sealed. Inside was a single sheet covered with Daniel's handwriting. A work list. Replace porch brace. Patch north roof. Check well seal. Repair pantry board. Weatherproof basement door. Mara read each line twice. Most had check marks beside them. Near the bottom was a final note. Finish before winter. Beneath it, written separately, for M. Mara lowered the paper. Eli looked over her shoulder but said nothing. "M," she whispered. There were tears in her eyes before she could stop them. She turned away, embarrassed by how quickly they came. For days, she had been angry at Daniel for dying. Angry at Diane for locking the door. Angry at herself for staying away so long. This was different. This was proof that, while Mara had believed the distance between them had become permanent, her father had been using his remaining strength to repair something with her in mind. She pressed the heel of her hand against her eyes. He should have just called. Eli stayed near the table. "Yeah." Mara laughed once through the tears. "That's all you've got? It sounds like the truth." She nodded. That was why she trusted him enough not to send him away. The storm wind pushed rain against the kitchen window. Mara wiped her face and looked again at Daniel's list. "I still don't understand. Maybe there's more." She started folding the page, then noticed faint writing visible through the paper. "Wait." Mara turned it over. On the back. Daniel had written one additional line. No explanation, no date, just 6 words. Mara read them aloud. "Journal last page. When she's ready." Mara was halfway to the basement before Eli finished reading the note. She carried Eleanor's journal against her chest and took the stone steps too quickly, nearly slipping on the damp second step. Scout followed close behind. "Last page," Mara said. "Dad knew exactly where this was." Eli came down with a flashlight. "Then maybe whatever he wanted you to see is still there." Mara set the journal on a wooden crate and opened it near the back. She turned one page, then another. The handwriting continued through late entries from Eleanor's final years, but the binding suddenly changed near the end. Several narrow paper stubs remained where pages had been torn away. Mara stared at them. No. She ran her thumb carefully along the ragged edges. Someone removed them. Elle crouched beside her. Could they have fallen out? Not like this. The paper had been pulled cleanly from the binding. Mara flipped backward, searching for anything that explained Daniel's message. Nothing. The last complete entry was ordinary canned beans delivered to a family, blankets stored for winter, a note about repairing a shelf. No message for Mara, no loose letter, no final page. He wrote last page, she said. So where is it? Eli shone his light behind the crate and beneath the shelf. Maybe it was tucked into the back cover. They searched the tin box, the surrounding shelves, and the floor. Scout sniffed every corner but found nothing beyond dust and old wood. Mara's frustration sharpened into certainty. Diane. Eli looked up. You know that she had Dad's papers. She went through everything after he died. That doesn't prove she came here. Mara held up the torn journal. Someone did. She climbed back upstairs and reached for her phone. One bar appeared, then disappeared. She walked toward the front window until the signal returned and called Diane. No answer. Mara called again. On the third attempt, Diane picked up. What now? Were you ever at Grandma Eleanor's farmhouse with Dad? Silence. Mara's grip tightened around the phone. Diane? Why are you asking? Because pages are missing from a journal Dad specifically told me to read. Another pause. What journal? Don't. Mara heard her own voice rise and forced it down. Please don't make me drag this out. Were you here? Diane exhaled. Once. Mara closed her eyes. Why your father kept driving up there. I know. No, you know now. I knew then. He was sick. He was spending money at hardware stores, and he wouldn't explain what he was doing. I thought he was hiding something. Money, assets, property, anything. Mara looked at Daniel's receipts spread across the table. So you followed him? One afternoon. And the journal. Diane's silence answered before she spoke. I found it later. Later where? At the farmhouse. Daniel had left it out. Mara turned toward Eli. He had moved away, giving her space, but his expression told her he could hear enough. You tore pages out. I took an envelope that had been tucked into the back. Mara went completely still. An envelope? Yes. Was it for me your name was on it? The room seemed to narrow. And you kept it. I thought it might contain something relevant to the estate. So you opened it? Yes. Mara's anger came fast and hot. You opened a letter my father wrote to me. I was handling his affairs. It had my name on it. And at the time, I was trying to figure out whether your father had put money into a property while medical bills were piling up. Diane's voice changed, becoming harder. You weren't here, Mara. That stopped her for half a second. Diane continued before Mara could answer. You want to make me the villain because I changed a lock and went through paperwork. Fine, but I was the one driving him to appointments. I was the one helping him out of bed. I was the one sitting in pharmacies, arguing over what insurance would cover. Mara pressed her fingers against the windowsill. That doesn't give you the right to keep my letter. No, Diane said after a moment. It doesn't. The admission unsettled Mara more than another argument would have. What was in it? Words. What words? I didn't memorize it. Diane sounded tired now. There was no money, no account information, nothing valuable. Mara almost laughed at that. Nothing valuable. The same way Diane had described the farmhouse, the same way she had dismissed everything that could not be reduced to a number. Where is it? Mara asked. In the estate files at the house. Give it to me. We still have paperwork to settle. Mara's voice sharpened. You are not using my father's letter to make me sign anything. I didn't say I was. You called me yesterday, offering money if I waived further claims. Because I want this estate finished, and I want the letter. Diane went quiet again. When she spoke, her tone was lower. You think I enjoyed any of this? Watching him spend his last months fixing some old farmhouse instead of taking care of himself, Mara turned from the window. He was fixing it for me. I know that now. Did you know then? Not at first. The anger in Mara shifted into something messier. Diane had known Daniel in a way Mara had not during his final months. She hated that. She hated herself for hating it. Why didn't you tell me he was sick enough that time was running out? She asked. I did. Mara's throat tightened. You said he was having treatments. Because that's what he wanted, said. He kept telling me not to make you come back out of guilt. Mara closed her eyes. She remembered missed calls, short conversations. Daniel saying he was tired but doing fine. Mara promising she would visit when work settled down. There had always been another week, another month. He should have told me, she whispered. Probably, Diane's answer held no triumph. But you could have called more too. The sentence landed where Mara had been trying not to look. She turned away from Eli and stared at the rain streaking the glass. Diane was not innocent. Neither was Mara. That was the worst part. There was no clean place to stand. I want the letter, Mara said. Then come get it. I can't just leave. The road flooded yesterday. Diane paused. The weather report says the river could rise again tonight. Mara looked outside. The rain had strengthened while they spoke, drumming against the porch roof. Can you bring it? No. Why not? Because I have things here I'm dealing with. And because I'm not driving those roads in a storm. Mara almost snapped back. But the practical truth stopped her. Diane added, the letter is here, in the estate folder. I'm not throwing it away. That's generous, Mara. What if you come? Come before the water gets worse, the call ended. Mara lowered the phone. For several seconds, only the rain filled the kitchen. Eli waited until she looked at him. She has it, Mara nodded. Dad wrote me a letter. Diane took it from the journal. And she'll give it back if I go get it. Eli looked toward the window. Road won't stay open forever if this keeps up. Mara glanced at Eleanor's journal, then at Daniel's work list. Guilt pressed against anger until she could barely separate them. Scout stood beside the rear door, ears tilted toward the rain. Mara slipped Daniel's note into the journal and closed the cover. Outside, thunder rolled low over the mountains. Then Diane's final warning returned to her with uncomfortable clarity. If you want the letter, come get it before the river rises again. By the time Mara and Eli left the farmhouse, the rain had thickened into a gray wall. Scout remained inside with food, water, and the kitchen blocked off from the worst leaks. Mara hated leaving him, but the road was already narrowing beneath runoff, and she knew every minute mattered. Eli drove slowly, keeping the truck high on the gravel whenever water crossed the lower sections. Mara held the dashboard with one hand and Daniel's wallet with the other. If the road gets worse, we turn around. Eli said, not without the letter. I'm not saying we leave it. It sounded like you were, I'm saying drowning for it won't help you read it. Mara looked out at the creek, swollen brown between the trees. She knew he was right, which only made the tension in her chest worse. Diane's house appeared through the rain 20 minutes later. Mara was out of the truck before Eli had fully stopped. She climbed the porch steps and knocked hard. Diane opened the door holding a thick folder against her chest. For a second, neither woman spoke. The hallway behind Diane looked exactly as Mara remembered it, except the lock was new. You came, Diane said. You told me to. Diane stepped aside enough to let Mara enter, but Mara remained on the porch. Just give me the letter. Diane looked at Eli, waiting near the truck, then back at Mara. You could come inside. I don't want to. A flicker of hurt or irritation crossed Diane's face. She opened the folder and removed a cream-colored envelope. Mara was written across the front in Daniel's unmistakable handwriting. Mara's throat tightened immediately. "You opened it," she said. "Yes." "And kept it?" "Yes." Diane held it out. Mara took the envelope, but did not move. Rain drummed against the porch roof. "Why didn't you give this to me at the funeral?" "Because I was angry." The answer was so simple, Mara almost missed it. Diane looked down at the folder. "Daniel spent months going to that farmhouse, while I was begging him to rest. He said he needed to finish something. I thought he was pouring money we didn't have into an old property because he couldn't accept how sick he was." Mara gripped the envelope. "So you punished me for it?" "Maybe." Diane's mouth tightened. "Or maybe I was exhausted and resentful and not thinking clearly." Mara had expected defensiveness. The admission left her with nowhere easy to put her anger. "That doesn't make it okay." "I know." Diane looked toward the rain. "And neither does what happened between you and your father make the last few years simple." Mara's eyes dropped to Daniel's name embossed faintly on the old stationery through the envelope. "No." Diane handed her the remaining folder. "These are copies of the estate papers. I'm not asking you to sign anything today." Mara took them. "Why?" "Because you won't believe anything I say until you read that letter anyway." It was the closest thing to surrender Diane had offered. Mara nodded once and turned away. "Mara." She stopped. Diane's voice softened. "Get back before the road closes." Eli was already watching the creek when Mara returned to the truck. "You got it." She held up the envelope. "Yeah. You opening it now?" Mara looked at her father's handwriting. She wanted to tear it open immediately. Instead, she tucked it inside her jacket. "At the farmhouse." Elle glanced at the rain. "Then we better move." They made it less than halfway back before he slowed sharply. Water crossed the road ahead from ditch to ditch, deeper than before. A branch spun in the current. "No," Eli said. "We're not taking the truck through that." Mara stared across the flooded stretch. "The farmhouse is on the other side." "I know." "Scouts there." "I know." "And the basement." Eli looked up the slope. "There's an old logging track above this section. Longer route. Too rough for the truck in this weather. But we can walk it." Mara opened the door. "Then let's go." "You have decent boots." Mara looked down at her mud-soaked shoes. "No, of course not." He grabbed 2 raincoats, a flashlight, and a small pack from behind the seat. They left the truck on high ground and climbed. The logging track was barely visible beneath leaves and runoff. Twice Mara slipped and caught herself on branches. Eli stayed close without touching her unless she needed it. "How much farther?" she asked, breathless. "Another mile, maybe." Thunder rolled above them. Mara pressed the envelope tighter beneath her jacket. When the farmhouse finally appeared through the trees, relief lasted only seconds. Water covered part of the lower yard. Scout barked from inside. Mara ran to the porch. "Scout." The dog met her at the door, whining and circling her legs. She dropped to her knees and held his head against her chest. "I'm here." Eli entered behind her and immediately checked the back of the house. "Mara!" Something in his voice made her stand. Water was seeping beneath the basement door. They rushed outside. The drainage trench they had cut had overflowed, and muddy runoff was pouring toward the buried entrance. Eli grabbed the shovel. "We need everything important out of there, now!" Mara took the flashlight and descended first. The basement floor was already wet near the lowest wall. Water threaded between the stones. The shelves remained above it for now, but the level was climbing. "Journal first," Mara said. She carried Eleanor's journal upstairs along with the photograph of the families. Eli followed with boxes of records and wrapped bundles. They worked quickly, moving only what could be saved without wasting time on ruined cans or empty containers. Scout paced at the top of the steps, anxious but out of the way. Mara returned for another box and found a heavy ledger on the lowest shelf. Water had reached one corner. She lifted it and opened the cover. Page after page contained names, supplies, and dates extending across years. Some entries had "returned" beside them. Others included notes directing one family to another. Eli. He looked over. This is bigger than the journal. Bring it. They carried the ledger upstairs. Mara had just set it on the table when headlights flashed through the rain outside. Then another pair appeared behind them. Eli went to the porch. Who the hell is coming up here now? The first vehicle stopped near the fence. Ruth Calder climbed out wearing a yellow raincoat. Behind her came 3 more trucks. Men and women stepped into the rain carrying tarps, plastic tubs, rope, and tools. Mara stared. Ruth marched onto the porch. You thought we were going to let Eleanor Hale's records wash down the creek? Mara looked past her at the strangers unloading supplies. How did you know? Eli called me earlier about the water. Elle shrugged when Mara turned toward him. Figured we might need hands. They did. For the next 2 hours, the farmhouse filled with movement. Records came up from the basement, blankets were moved to higher shelves. One man reinforced the drainage channel while another secured the cellar door against debris. Ruth organized boxes on the second floor. Mara opened the ledger again between trips and realized what she was seeing. The same surnames repeated across decades, sometimes receiving help, later returning to assist someone else. Calder, Mercer, Dalton, Webb, dozens more. Eleanor had not kept a list of debts. She had tracked a chain. When the last salvageable records were carried upstairs, Mara stood in the hallway surrounded by people whose families had once stood in this same house needing help. Now they had come back to save it. The thought caught in her chest. She had arrived believing she had inherited a ruined farmhouse because nobody wanted it, yet people had crossed flooded roads to keep its history from disappearing. Near midnight, the rain finally weakened. Water still covered part of the yard, but the basement had stopped rising. Ruth and the others settled downstairs with coffee and blankets, while Mara sat alone on the second-floor landing. Daniel's envelope rested in her hands. She had carried it all evening without opening it. Now there was nothing left to delay. She slid one finger beneath the flap and unfolded the letter inside. Daniel's handwriting filled the first page. Mara read the opening line once, then again. Mara, if you're reading this, I ran out of time. Mara read the first line until the words blurred. Mara, if you're reading this, I ran out of time. She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand and continued. Daniel's letter did not begin with excuses. He wrote that he had spent too many years believing there would always be another chance to repair what had gone wrong between them. After Mara left West Virginia, he had mistaken her independence for a wish to be left alone. Every short phone call made the next one harder. Then his illness worsened, and by the time he understood how little time remained, he no longer knew how to say everything he should have said years earlier. Mara lowered the page. Downstairs, voices moved quietly through the farmhouse as Ruth and the others checked the salvaged boxes. Scout lay against Mara's leg, warm and solid. She rested one hand on his head and returned to the letter. Daniel wrote about Eleanor next. He explained what Mara had already begun to understand from the journal. During years when mines closed, jobs disappeared, floods ruined homes, and winter stretched household budgets beyond breaking, Eleanor kept the basement stocked. Families came for flour, vegetables, medicine, blankets, coal, or whatever she could gather. She never wanted repayment. When they recovered, she asked them to help someone else. Daniel had grown up watching people arrive ashamed and leave with enough to get through another week. He had also watched many of them return months later carrying food, firewood, clothing, or simply strong hands. Eleanor called that returning, not paying back. Returning. Mara looked toward the boxes stacked along the upstairs wall. The ledger had proven it. Ruth had proven it. Eli's grandfather's name had proven it. Her grandmother's quiet system had survived not because anyone had been forced to repay a debt, but because enough people had remembered what it felt like to need help. Daniel's letter continued. Years later, after Eleanor was gone and the farmhouse emptied, he had allowed the place to deteriorate. He regretted that. When his doctors stopped speaking about years and began speaking about months, he returned to the property. He repaired the lock first, then the porch brace, the roof, the siding. He had planned to fix the well, clean the basement, and make at least one bedroom livable before telling Mara he wanted to give her the farmhouse when the work was finished. Mara pressed the letter against her knee. "You idiot," she whispered. Scout lifted his head. He could rebuild a roof, but he couldn't make a phone call? Her voice cracked on the last word. Daniel seemed almost to answer from the next paragraph. He wrote that he knew repairing wood was easier for him than repairing relationships. A board told him where it was broken. People did not. He had convinced himself he could finish the farmhouse first and then ask Mara to come home. As though a repaired building could somehow make the conversation less frightening. He had been wrong. "Yes," Mara whispered. "You were." Tears fell onto her hand. She did not wipe them away this time. The letter did not erase the missed birthdays or short calls. It did not return the months Mara had believed her father was merely tired when he was dying. It did not remove her own guilt for repeatedly promising to visit later. But for the first time, the silence between them no longer looked like indifference. It looked like two stubborn people waiting for the other to cross a distance that kept growing. Daniel told her the farmhouse was hers without condition. She could sell it, leave West Virginia, tear it down if that was what she wanted. Eleanor's life was not a debt Mara inherited. Neither was Daniel's regret. He wanted her to have a choice. Mara folded the letter when she heard footsteps. Eli stopped at the top of the stairs. "You okay?" "No." He nodded. "Fair enough." Mara gave a wet laugh. "He was fixing it for me." "I figured." "He knew about everything downstairs." "That makes sense." And he still couldn't call. Eli sat 2 steps below her. "Let her explain why, not in a way that fixes it." "Maybe it wasn't supposed to." Mara looked at him. That was what she appreciated about Eli. He never tried to turn Daniel into a better father than he had been. He let love and failure exist together. Morning arrived slowly behind thinning clouds. The creek remained high, but the worst of the flood had passed. Downstairs, Ruth opened the salvaged ledger on the kitchen table. Others gathered around as Mara carried Eleanor's journal down. One by one, they confirmed pieces of what Daniel had written. Ruth remembered the winter Eleanor brought medicine. Eli recognized Thomas Mercer in the photograph. Another older resident recognized the Dalton family. Different memories connected to the same pages until Mara no longer needed to wonder whether Eleanor's records represented some private business or forgotten debts. The answer had been sitting around her all night in wet boots and borrowed raincoats. Eleanor had helped families survive. Those families had helped others. That was the secret beneath the farmhouse. Near midday, another vehicle came carefully up the damaged road. Mara stiffened when Diane stepped out. She carried no folder this time. She stopped at the porch as though uncertain whether she was welcome. Mara went outside. "I read it," she said. Diane nodded. "I assumed you would." Dad wanted me to have this place. Yes, not because nobody else wanted it. Diane looked toward the farmhouse. No. Mara waited for anger to return, but she mostly felt tired. I'm not signing it away. I know. And I'm not selling it just to make the estate easier. Diane's jaw tightened, then relaxed. All right. It was not an apology, and Mara did not need to pretend it was. Diane had kept the letter. Mara had stayed away. Daniel had hidden how sick he was and tried to repair with lumber what he had been afraid to repair with words. None of them could rewrite those choices. I'm keeping the farmhouse, Mara said. Diane looked at her for a long moment. Then I hope you can afford the roof. Mara almost smiled. There she is. To Mara's surprise, Diane gave the faintest, tired smile back. Then she returned to her car without another argument. That afternoon, Mara walked through the damaged rooms alone. Mud marked the lower walls. The basement smelled of wet stone. The roof still needed work. The pantry board remained loose where Scout had found Daniel's list. This place was not suddenly easy because its history mattered. Mara still had little money. She still had no clear plan for what came next. But she no longer saw the farmhouse as the worthless thing Diane had pushed toward her after locking the door. Daniel had chosen it for her. Eleanor had filled it with something that had outlasted every can of food stored downstairs. Mara returned to the porch with Daniel's letter. She had saved the final paragraph, unable to read it earlier. Now she unfolded the page. Daniel wrote that Eleanor used to tell him everyone needed somewhere to return when life closed a door in their face. He wished he had remembered that sooner. He wished he had been brave enough to tell Mara himself. Then came the final line. I just wanted you to have one door in this world nobody could ever lock you out of. Mara pressed her fingers to her mouth. Behind her, Scout whined softly. Before she could turn, an engine sounded beyond the fence. Then another. Mara looked down the road. A pickup appeared between the trees. Behind it came a second truck. Then a third. More headlights followed around the bend. Mara stood as the vehicles kept coming. Not one car, not two, dozens. The first pickup stopped beside the sagging fence, and an older man climbed out, carrying 2 bundles of lumber on a roof rack. The second truck brought sheets of plywood. The third carried tools, roofing material, and 3 people Mara recognized from the night before. Then the road filled with vehicles. Ruth stepped from one of them and walked toward the porch, as if dozens of people arriving at an abandoned farmhouse were the most ordinary thing in the world. What is this? Mara asked. Ruth glanced back. Returning. The word hit Mara harder than she expected. People began unloading before she could respond. Lumber, nails, tarps, canned food, bottled water, blankets, paint. A woman carried 2 boxes of children's coats. Someone else unloaded bags of dog food, earning Scout's immediate attention. Eli came around the side of the house and stared at the growing crowd. You knew about this? Mara asked him. Not this many. Ruth opened Eleanor's journal in the porch table and pointed to several names. I made calls. Then those people made calls. Mara looked across the yard. Some faces belonged to people old enough to remember Eleanor. Others were younger, children and grandchildren of names written in the basement ledger. A man introduced himself as a Dalton. A woman said her mother had been one of the Webb children Eleanor helped through a winter when their furnace failed. Thomas Mercer's family was represented by Eli, already carrying lumber toward the porch. No one offered Mara an envelope of money. No one promised to solve her life. They simply looked at what was broken and started working. One group removed damaged boards from the porch. Another cleared mud from the basement entrance and deepened the drainage trench. 2 men inspected the roof while Eli repaired the hand pump properly. Mara spent the morning moving between them, answering questions she barely knew how to answer. "Keep the old boards if they're sound," she told one man. "Don't throw away anything from the basement without asking." By noon, the farmhouse sounded alive. Hammers struck wood. A saw buzzed near the barn. Scout wandered from person to person as though supervising the entire operation. Mara stood in the kitchen staring at shelves newly filled with food people had brought. 3 days earlier she had counted crackers and wondered how long $37 could keep her fed. Now there was enough soup, beans, flour, peanut butter, and bottled water to last far longer than she needed. That was when she understood what bothered her about keeping it all. Ruth. The older woman looked up from wiping mud off a rescued storage box. What did Grandma do when she had more than one family needed? Ruth smiled. Now you're asking the right question. They carried part of the food downstairs once the basement had dried enough to use safely. Not the old cans. Those were discarded. The new supplies went on to cleaned shelves. Mara placed them where Eleanor's boxes had once stood. "I don't want to turn this into some big organization," Mara said. "Then don't." "I don't know how to run anything. Eleanor didn't run an organization either." She paid attention. Mara looked at the shelves. "People still need this." Ruth gave her a look that made the question answer itself. In the weeks that followed, the farmhouse changed slowly rather than magically. The roof still cost money. Materials still ran short. Some days only Mara and Eli worked. Mara found temporary work in town and learned to stretch every dollar. She decided not to leave West Virginia yet. At first, she told herself she was staying until the repairs were finished. Eventually, she stopped giving herself a deadline. Eli repaired the hand pump and showed her how to maintain the seal. Together, they rebuilt part of the porch, arguing over measurements until Mara became good enough with a saw that he stopped checking every cut she made. Their friendship remained uncomplicated by promises neither needed. He showed up. Mara learned to trust that. The basement became dry storage again. Eleanor's journal and ledger were preserved upstairs, away from floodwater, along with copies of the old photographs. The shelves below held canned food, coats, blankets, basic medicine, and emergency supplies. People left what they could. Others took what they needed. Mara kept records, but never dollar amounts. One afternoon, Diane's car came up the road. Mara watched from the porch as her stepmother opened the trunk and removed a battered metal toolbox. Mara recognized it before Diane reached the steps. This was Daniel's. Diane said. Mara touched the scratched handle. "I know. I found it behind some things in the garage." Diane hesitated. "It belongs here more than it belongs with me." Mara could have reminded her of the changed lock, the hidden letter, the cash offer. None of those things had disappeared. Forgiveness, Mara was discovering, did not require pretending nothing happened. "Thank you," she said. Diane nodded. She did not ask to come inside, and Mara did not invite her, but when she left, neither woman slammed a door. Mara placed Daniel's toolbox beside the hammer marked DB later. She took his old wallet from her duffel bag. The $37 was no longer intact. Some had bought food during those first desperate days. Mara exchanged what remained and replaced the spent bills until she had exactly $37 again. She put the money in a simple frame with a small handwritten note beneath it. "What I thought he left me." She hung it beside the pantry, underneath. On a second card she wrote, "What he actually left couldn't fit in a wallet." Months after the funeral, on a cold morning when mist covered the West Virginia hills, Mara stood on the repaired porch drinking coffee. Scout lay beside the doorway, older looking in the gray light, but content. The farmhouse was still weathered. Mara had chosen not to erase that. The boards carried scars. So did she. A car came slowly up the road. A woman stepped out with 2 children in the back seat, and embarrassment already written across her face. Ruth had told her she could come. Mara led her inside and packed a box with canned vegetables, pasta, peanut butter, blankets, and a few other things. The woman kept looking at the floor. "I can pay some of it next week," she said.
"You don't have to. I don't want charity."
Mara understood the words because Eleanor had understood them first. She glanced toward the journal resting safely on a shelf upstairs, then toward Daniel's $37 on the wall. "It isn't a debt." The woman looked at her. "Then how do I pay it back?" Mara remembered the first time she had seen "returned" written on an old wooden box. She remembered Thomas Mercer's name. Ruth's winter without enough food, the flooded basement, and trucks coming over the mountain carrying lumber instead of promises. "When things get better," Mara said, "help the next person." The woman held her gaze, then nodded. Mara carried the box to her car. After the family drove away, she returned to the porch. Scout stretched in the sunlight, breaking through the clouds. Mara rested one hand on the farmhouse door. After Daniel's funeral, she had stood outside her childhood home with a key that no longer worked, believing $37, a dog, and a worthless building were all that remained of her place in the world. She understood differently now. Being left something was not the same as being left behind. Her father had failed to say what mattered while he still had time. Mara had failed to reach back while she still believed there would always be another chance. Neither truth erased the other, but Daniel had spent his final months trying, board by board, to give his daughter somewhere she could return. Eleanor had done something similar for people who had nowhere else to go. Mara stepped inside. Behind her, the farmhouse door remained open. She looked at it for a moment, remembered her father's final words, and smiled through the ache that still came whenever she thought of him. Then she left the door exactly that way open, for whoever needed it next.